my first virtual town hall. My name is Jim Barber. I'm running for the state senate in the 51st district. I know many of you may not have met me yet or be familiar with me, so I'll take a little time to explain who I am. I'm a fifth generation farmer in Schoharie County, a very diversified farm. Me and my wife Cindy are the fifth generation. My nephew and son are the sixth generation, so we're very fortunate to have that farm stay in our family that long. And we kind of do that by being able to understand what the trends are and what's going on around us. Also very involved in my local community. I've served on the school board, served on many committees, serving the community. Chamber of Commerce, committee designed to ensure the safety of the Gilboa Dam was intact when that whole situation arose a number of years ago. I've also served on several statewide committees with the Farm Bureau and vegetable growers. I served 2 years in the New York State Department of Agriculture as a special assistant to the Commissioner of Agriculture. One of the programs I worked on there was initiating the use of EBT, food stamps at farm stands, being able to use electronic cards there. And then I served 7 years as the state executive director for the Farm Service Agency of the USDA, where we actually enacted several changes in federal farm policy. Pretty unusual for a state like New York to have that much impact on federal policy. And we also really improved the efficiency of operations at a time when our budgets were reduced by 20% in staff and cut offices. We actually improved the delivery of services. So being able to make government operate more efficiently and effectively is something I have a bit of experience doing. So I want to make sure that you're all aware that we're going to have a number of these virtual town halls, and they will be, that list is on the website. And every Sunday morning we are doing a virtual pancake breakfast, really unrelated to the campaign. But when I, early on in my campaign, or more recently, before we had everything was shut down, one of the things I really enjoyed doing was getting around to the local fire halls and EMT offices with the volunteer companies and enjoying their fundraising breakfast and dinners to meet folks. So I have lost that opportunity. But more importantly, these volunteer organizations have lost their opportunity to raise the funds they need to function, but they are still on call 24/7 to serve their communities. So I thought one way that we can help them get through this as well is to raise awareness that they now are struggling to raise funds for their offices or their organizations. So every Sunday morning I will have a virtual pancake breakfast at my house and post it on Facebook along with an address, or if we can get the technology figured out, a donate button where money can go directly to the volunteer organization I'm highlighting that morning. So please join me Sunday mornings for that, and we will try to help those folks who serve our community so well. I think rather than run through my normal stump speech, I was going to focus on issues that are really kind of relevant to what's going on right now with the COVID outbreak and impacts that has had on our communities and industry. One thing, it really highlights the need for broadband service in rural areas. We are now trying to teach our children in their homes remotely. And if your home doesn't have access to broadband, what kind of impact does that have on your child's education? Not to mention trying to do business remotely and people working from home. So this really highlights why it is so critical that we actually finish what we started many years ago in trying to build out broadband access to every part of this state. It also highlights, the kind of the shortcomings of our healthcare system. When your healthcare is tied to where you work, and then you become unemployed because of something like this, you not only lose your income, you lose your healthcare. So it's a system that builds upon itself, and it really exemplifies community-wide what so many people go through individually on a more normal scale, just in the normal course of their living and trying to earn a living. If they lose their job and their health care, they need to try to figure out how to make things work. Well, now, half of our population is experiencing that same thing. So we need to do something about addressing, health care in this country, and we'll do what we can in this state to make sure that everyone has access to health care. And also, this is going to really burden our rural healthcare systems. I mean, when we see what's going on in the more urban areas, I think the experts are telling us we're all going to experience some degree of that. And our rural healthcare facilities are fragile as it is, because of reimbursement rates to the Medicaid system and Medicare are not what they should be. And we're going to be struggling with that for a while. Fortunately, the state is stepping up to do what it can to help shore up our healthcare facilities. Another thing I heard about on the radio is people worried about having their power cut off because they can no longer pay their bills, so they're going to start losing their access to the energy and other so this kind of ties in actually also with environmental issues. We know that we want to move to a green energy economy. Renewable energy is very important, not only for sustained energy production, but to address climate change. One of the most important things we can do in that regard is to create municipal-owned energy production companies, so that the municipalities get to decide, where solar farms and wind farms are sited, and by owning the means of production, that money stays in the local economy. And when you get a situation like that, the community can say, we are not going to evict people. So we can kind of, by having it a very community-oriented system, we can really help our communities that way. And finally, property taxes. It's a crazy system. We need to fix the entire tax system in this state, because right now, so much of our upstate counties' means of raising income is from property taxes. And you see just because people's incomes go down, you've lost business from your small business, people have lost jobs, your income is going down, property taxes stay the same. It really highlights what a crazy way it is to raise taxes, completely unrelated to your means, your ability to pay. So we need to address that going forward. All right, so folks have been sending in questions, and I'm going to get to that. It's very funny not having any feedback from the audience, like audible feedback. So bear with me as we see how we do here. So Margaret F. from Brooktondale says. She says, hello, thank you for sending information on upcoming virtual meetings. We recently had an update from HughesNet, our satellite internet provider, which stated they expected a surge in access requests, which will result in intermittent problems with subscribers. The purpose of this note is to ask you to address the problem of internet access for many pockets of rural areas, especially in the Ithaca area. Yes, so Margaret, thank you for that. And I just kind of mentioned earlier that, that is, one of the real issues facing rural America. And if we want to entice people to live in rural areas and make it a good place to do business, we need to address that. And like many of my neighbors in rural communities, we face the same issue, at our house, trying to, having the bandwidth to do the things we want to do. I mentioned the pancake breakfast earlier. We cannot live stream those because we don't have the bandwidth. So it is a problem. I think one thing that happened, you had state policy that enabled large providers to cherry pick the customers that they wanted, the most cost effective. That means we had to go back at a higher cost to try to address the needs of the customers in more remote areas. So that situation needs to be corrected. We need to claw back some of that money we've already provided to other companies so that we can use that to invest in getting access to more rural areas. And we know that subsidies and grants in the hands of the smaller companies like Midtel and Delhi Net have resulted in much better coverage. They're very committed to serving their rural areas. Those are their neighbors, and they're doing an excellent job. We do need to address some of the more recent issues that have hampered their ability to do that. They're being charged taxes to use the DOT right-of-way, which no other utility does. So we need to address that. So Adam E. from Gilboa. I'm a small business owner who had been living between New York City and Gilboa area for at least 8 years. I think your focus on education funding is exactly what we need in this area to improve the quality of life for everyone. My question to you is in regard to the continuing economic stagnation that seems to always linger around this area. I see so much wonderful land and people who are willing to work on it. You and your son Elias have done a wonderful job with the distillery, which is a great example of how we can innovate with products on our land. Our land here can always has produced and draw attention from the industry. We can innovate with the products our land here can and always has produced and draw attention from industry in the city and perhaps tourism. I know we are capable of doing more with what we have here, and I'm wondering how you see the state incentivizing communities like ours to do the same sort of innovative thinking, to work to make this area prosperous again, whether it is dairy farming, planting new crops, opening modern vacation spots, etc. So Adam, thank you for your question. Economic stagnation is, it's a real problem in our rural areas. We need to find innovative ways to improve that. And again, property taxes, one of the things that really weighs down being able to advance, small businesses in rural areas. And when you think about it, one of the first things we do in this state to entice businesses to come is to reduce the property taxes. That pretty much highlights, that is the problem. So we need to address that. We also need to build out an infrastructure because agriculture is the second largest industry in the state, and of course one of the most critical components of the upstate rural economy. We need to build out a infrastructure that helps both mid-scale processing and also distribution. How do we help many small farms aggregate their product together to serve a much larger area like New York City, and there are a lot of efforts going on in that way. The state needs to work very hard to incentivize that and also be careful not to get in the way of that functioning correctly. So we need to be very smart and careful in the way that the state oversees and regulates that industry to make sure that people are safe, but that commerce can progress as it should. Okay, when you're elected, will you repeal bail reform. So I knew that question would be coming. So bail reform, well, first of all, Thomas, thank you for that question. And really the interesting thing about the whole bail reform issue is it brings to light what the actual issues are. Traditionally, bail has been a way of ensuring that someone returns for their court date. It's not intended as a way to keep someone in jail. It's just a way to make sure that they return for their court date. So if two people commit the same crime, a robbery of some sort, one person can afford bail. He gets to leave the court, go home, returns to his job, returns to his family. If another person cannot reform or afford bail, he's remitted to jail. So it's the same crime, but an unfair system in which some people, if you can't afford bail, you lose your job, you can't see your family. So it's not a matter of we're letting more criminals out. So what we really need to address in bail reform, which was intended to make the system more equitable, we need to think, so what is it that we're actually releasing people for? I mean, let's focus on what the crimes are that we think people should remain in jail for, not whether they can afford to get out or not. So I think not so much repealing it, but we really need to look at it. And there are always unintended consequences. We need to give more discretion back to the judges. I was just listening to a judge about a couple of weeks ago when we could still get together for workshops and roundtables. And he said when folks come in for drug addiction in his court, he could give them a choice. They could go to jail, regular jail, or they could go to the drug treatment court. Given that choice, they would almost always choose the drug treatment program and help them work their way out of drug dependency. When you take that incentive away, that that now without the being able to say give them that choice, because we're releasing them without because of the bail reform program. Now there's no incentive for them to choose drug interdiction treatment, and so they don't. So this is one of those examples of the unintended consequences of having an adverse impact on people we're actually trying to help. Your thoughts on gun regulations and the New York SAFE Act. This is Thomas B. Is that the same person that asked? Yep, same person. All right. From Tompkins County. Yeah, so Thomas, thank you for that. Yeah, I am a gun owner, and I'm a strong believer in the Second Amendment and actually all the rights established by the Constitution. It's a remarkable document, and it's helped this country through a lot of major issues over the years. So regarding the SAFE Act itself, I think we need to remember that that was enacted in response to a really horrible tragedy, a mass shooting at Sandy Hook, and that the Democratic Assembly and the Republican Senate came together realizing that something needed to be done to address this type of mass shooting. And so the SAFE Act was passed as a bipartisan effort to deal with that. So it's we need to realize that there still is wide agreement that action needs to be taken to address mass shootings. But it's also important that when we create policies like that are have such wide-ranging impact, that we make sure that all the parties that have a vested interest in that are at the table. And I'm not sure that happened with the SAFE Act. I think it was quickly enacted and probably not didn't have as much discussion as should take place. So the discussion really should be, how do we protect our citizens, our children, grandchildren, every other citizen in this country from the increasing number of mass shootings that occur, but also while maintaining the right of gun ownership, for every law-abiding citizen to own guns, for whatever reason, for self-protection, sport, whatever reason they want to own. So we need to find a way, to balance that out, because tragically, the frequency of mass shootings has resulted in police being outgunned when they arrive at the scene, or even sometimes, they've killed the good guy with a gun at the scene, trying to, take care of, do what we think we should be doing and try to protect other folks. So there are a lot of issues with this, very complicated. So, strong individual rights and freedoms are a cornerstone of our democracy. And our government needs to very carefully balance those rights with a concern for the safety of our citizenship. So this is from Rachel. What is your thought about patients being brought upstate from New York City? Is this a safe way to address coronavirus? Okay, well, thank you for that, Rachel. And again, we live in a very strange and difficult time right now. I know there's a lot of anxiety going around amongst everyone. I think, this is an issue, first of all, I haven't heard of that happening, but it really is something that I would rely on the healthcare professionals, the scientists and folks who really understand the situation. How do they feel this should be handled? I don't think I do not have the expertise to really say, what is the proper way to handle, the patient load from a highly urban area like New York City to, some of the facilities, up here. So I understand the fear and anxiety, but I think that's the kind of thing we leave to the people who know, what the best solutions are. From Jeannie, what's happening with seasonal farm workers who travel from other countries? So, I'm not exactly sure what the focus of this question is. First of all, I think there's real concern among the farm community about being able to get the help that they need, to do the seasonal work. And we're approaching that time very soon where they're going to really need workers on the ground to get the job done. So, from that aspect of having another, very long-term impact on a very important industry to this state, it could be a pretty serious issue. So I'm going to assume that there'll be very strict screening processes in place where, quarantine processes where once they come into the country, they may be, I assume, quarantined for 2 weeks, and then once they arrive on the farm, again, quarantined for 2 weeks. That's what I would recommend. I don't know exactly. I haven't seen what the official protocols are, but I'm pretty sure soon, that kind of thing will be happening. But we certainly need workers here, and I'm not sure the countries they're coming from are in more of a outbreak situation than we are here. They may not feel safe coming here, which is the other issue. So even if we had the procedures to have them here safely, they may not want to come, and again, the same impact is it could have a very serious impact on our farm community and the local rural economy. From Kathy C. From Facebook, what do you think about support to local small businesses as we go through this current health crisis? So I think again, the federal government has passed some very important economic safety nets for farms and for a lot of small businesses and individuals. One of the ones I heard for small businesses is that if they have it comes to them as a loan, but if they use that money to retain their workforce, then it becomes a grant. So it's really designed to make sure that people stay employed and those businesses can ensure, can maintain those employees. I think the important thing to realize is that, this is hugely stressful and really unprecedented at the scale and how rapidly this has happened. But it still is something that's it will come to an end, perhaps almost as quickly as it grew. We don't know how long this period is going to be, but, and then things will, I think, pretty quickly get back on track. So the trick is to help support people, through that process. And different businesses are going to be impacted differently. So some folks, some businesses are going to lose the potential losing their entire year's income just from not being able to do what they need to do at this critical time. There are other businesses where they're going to lose their income during that outbreak period, but once we start to return to normal, they will pick up their business and continue on from there. We lived through the same thing with Hurricane Irene. When that flood hit, we basically lost our entire year's income. So we had an entire year with no income, and we are still working on that situation on our farm. So I certainly understand at a personal level, the impact that has on businesses, and it is a struggle. I think, we had to, that's tough. So, but we hate it. We were here. We made it through. So I think the important thing is, as long as you still have your basic resources and the community and the state and the government pulled together behind you, I think you can certainly make it work. From Chris C. Upstate New York and New York City often seem to be different countries rather than two parts of the same state. Do you have some thoughts on bridging that divide? Yes, and I think, when I first got into this race, one of the things that I recognized was that there was a great deal of friction between upstate communities and downstate. But I think the important thing is to realize that we actually have a lot in common and a lot of interdependency, and the important thing is to find that common ground. What are the things we need from each other, and focus on that and build out from that. So for example, most of the financial area strength of New York City really fuels upstate New York. The flow of funds generally is upstate, whereas fresh water and food and nutrition, that flows downstate down to New York City from upstate areas. So we have something they need. We are the watershed for New York City. It's the largest unfiltered watershed in the country, maybe in the world. We have that. We produce the nutrition that they're looking for. Farms in rural areas are going to play a huge part in climate change, with being able to support the green energy production that we need to go forward. So by being able to understand the importance of each segment to each other and to highlight that, if the city wants to continue to have that access to fresh local nutrition and clean water, they need to ensure that the farms and communities stay economically viable upstate. So they have to understand both parts of the equation. Any adverse impact on farms up here is going to have an adverse impact on them, and we need to make sure we can bridge that divide and understand our commonalities. So this is from Debbie H. in Cooperstown. Pardon me. We own a vacation rental home which depends 95% on baseball camp income. Dream Park has decided to close for this season, and All Star Village may close behind. There are multiple rental units in the area which will wind up giving back deposits with no income until next year, as I expect to have most, if not all, reservations canceled. Most owners need relief from taxes, payments, insurance, utilities, etc. What is being done discussed about relief from this sector of the business? Please make sure to post the town hall on YouTube or email so I can watch this, as I'm one of the essential workers working evenings. Okay, well, thank you, Debbie, and thank you for the work you are doing during this crisis. And yes, the full town halls will be available on Facebook and YouTube, I think. I'm not sure exactly how all the technology is working out, but it will be available. And yeah, you're not alone in worrying about lost income. And as I was just talking earlier, it's going to impact some industries differently than others. And as you mentioned, a good example of losing an entire year's income from this event. So even when the crisis abates and we go back to normal, this year is lost to some businesses. I think that's something that we really need to focus on at both the federal and state level, because we need to do what we can to support small businesses and local income earners. As we saw in the last economic downturn, a lot of resources went to supporting the financial institutions and the big banks, and Main Street and the small folks were not as much part of that solution as they should have been. So I think we have learned our lesson that way, and I'm very happy that a lot of the efforts going forward are really focused on how do we help the common everyday folks stay viable, to see their way through this situation. Okay, Robert C. How is it that hospitals are overwhelmed given the math? A state with 20 million is asked to absorb a portion of 10,000 COVID-19 cases. During the Second World War, Utica, New York built, staffed, and maintained Rhodes Hospital, so it's RHOD, so it's Rhodes Hospital, where thousands of patients, mainly amputees, were treated. All this construction and care took place while millions served abroad, leaving a reduced workforce behind. They built the planes, ships, tanks, and hospitals, and did it in short order. So Robert, thank you, and thank you for reminding everyone of what it's like when the country can come together and really work to get things done. I believe this is a little different in respect that it's the types of beds and equipment that's needed to deal with a contagious disease. Whereas I think what you were referring to are much more, the amputees, much more physical. You could have a lot of folks, in a facility, rehabilitating and trying to recover that way. So the type of structure that needs to be, that would need to be built is much different. And of course, I think we realize that the world is much different than it was, at that time. And it's I think that we can see examples of companies and folks, trying to, meet the current demand that's going on, and some very innovative practices. I've seen, I just saw an example of one of the local technology companies doing a ventilator, very simple, robotic, just squeezing like a handheld ventilator ball, and it seemed to be pretty effective, very low-tech solution, basically to get someone through until like the more sophisticated ventilators are available. But the point is they were building something that could be really mass-produced, by the thousands very quickly, as kind of a stopgap for trying to get folks onto the more advanced, more highly technical equipment. Yeah. all those lists. So this is from Mark. Do you favor the tax cap that basically governs local municipal budgets? Those budgets are so small already that growth is almost impossible. So I think really the solution is to reprioritize our whole tax system. As I said before, property taxes are a very unfair way to raise taxes. They have no relationship at all to what someone earns or what can they afford to pay. So if we have take a look at our system so that all wealth and income is taxed the same. Right now, if you earn your money through a paycheck or through the cash register of your small business, every dollar of that is taxed. But if you are an investment banker, you have a lot of unearned income, that is taxed at a lower rate, and there's certainly much more loopholes available where you can shield a lot of your income and your wealth from taxes. So we need to really, build a new tax system that taxes everyone, fairly, equitably. so that the folks who have the most wealth, who can afford to pay the most taxes, are actually paying the most taxes. As Warren Buffett famously says, he pays a lower tax rate than his secretary. Not that he pays less taxes, but his rate is lower than the secretary's, and that is inherently unfair. Why are the folks, as I say, if your income is coming through a paycheck, you are the folks out there working. The middle class is what built this country and what makes this country strong. Let's support them, and let's make sure that the very wealthy are paying their share and helping to really build out the infrastructure and support the infrastructure within this country and in rural areas that support their workforce and in turn support their company. I mean, Henry Ford said he paid his employees a pretty decent wage so that they could afford to buy his cars. He understood the dynamics of how this works. When we think only on the profits of the shareholders, we're forgetting that your company is building something that you're selling, and you need middle class out there and working class that can afford to purchase what you are creating. So we need to, less important than the tax cap is to change the system so that it's fair and equitable. I'm talking too much. Do we get a little commercial break? We're going to work a commercial break into the next one of these. Or only do 45 minutes probably. So, all right. Because, I don't get the pause while someone else reads the question. I got to read the question, answer the question. All right. Julie R., can you talk about your vision for protecting the environment and addressing climate change? So I addressed some of that a little bit before. I think farms and rural areas, rural communities can be a real key player in this entire need to really address climate change and reducing our carbon footprint. I know there are folks working on. First, let's take the farm side of this. They can be very important in both carbon sequestration and also the clean water, making sure we ensure clean water and healthy soils. There are groups working on a system called ecosystem benefits payments, I think is the way it is. Basically quantifying what good farming practices can produce, as far for instance, buffer strips or cover crops or different rotational grazing that have quantifiable benefits both in carbon sequestration and in building up soil and in protecting our watersheds. So traditionally what we have done, we'll offer farmers some assistance in installing certain practices, and then leave it at that. But as we know, farms are really struggling economically, and we're losing many farms. So if we want them to stay viable on the farm, to install. I'm talking too much now. To use those good farming practices, we need to find a way to compensate them so that they have a sustainable income, so that they can stay on the farm. They're not going. They can't keep doing it if they're not making a good living at it, and the kids, the next generation has to see a viable future. So we can find some way to ensure that farms stay economically viable and are voluntarily doing those practices which have a huge, tremendous community benefits, such as carbon sequestration and clean water. And also, and then I addressed the idea of a green energy economy in upstate, where the local municipalities actually have control both of where the solar fields, wind towers, hydropower, whatever system they want to put in place. If the municipality has their own energy company, or they are the energy company, they can control the siting instead of fighting the siting all the time where people want to site it. And also, instead of an outside company coming in, leasing the land, putting up the energy supply system, and then that money that's paid for energy then leaves the area. If the municipality owns the means of production, then that money stays local. That the money that you pay for your energy stays in the local economy and helps to increase that. So that money continues to circulate in the economy, and certainly keeps us a more robust, viable place. And when the rural economy does better, it makes it a place where people want to live. One of the things we need to do is to really find ways to re-energize and revitalize our rural areas, and that requires job creation. You also need to make it a place where people really want to live and can afford to live. And those are things like addressing adequate funding for schools, good roads, broadband, good healthcare facilities. That all takes income and it takes revenue. And as I say, by changing our tax structure in the state and removing that property tax burden off the counties, which right now, there are some counties where a vast majority of the money that's paid in property taxes just funds Medicaid. We're maybe the one, or maybe there might be two states that actually push the cost of Medicaid down on the county level. In rural counties, property taxes are the only real source of revenue they have. We don't have a huge sales tax or tourist tax income in many of the rural areas, so it's really forced down onto the landowners, and it's a real burden for the folks who are trying to live here and run a business here. So we need to move away from that system into a system that actually is more relative to a person's income, and that's how we can encourage farms, encourage businesses to grow and be established in upstate and rural New York, and also how you encourage people to want to live here and raise their family here. If you can have good schools and access to health care, and we need to be a little more creative in our transportation system. I mean, maybe perhaps funding a bus transit system through rural New York is not that feasible, but there's certainly like Uber and Lyft models where we can kind of marshal the assets that are already here. If we can find some way to subsidize that and help the infrastructure that's here to actually serve the people that need it, I think we have a good chance of solving that problem. This is from Warren B. Solar energy can a plan be created to minimize the visual impact while also supporting the green energy sector? So the visual impact, I think I think there are efforts along that line. I mean, they do try to keep them as low as possible. I think one of the challenges here in the topography that we have, we don't really want the solar arrays on the flat land, the good flat farmland where it's easy to shield them from view. We really want them on the hillsides where it's more marginal land, not good for production, but also very difficult to hide visually. The important thing is that there happen to be excellent grazing areas for sheep. We could create a tremendous sheep livestock industry in New York State. This country imports a lot of sheep from other countries right now. So here you have land and the reason sheep are important is because you need to control the undergrowth, the grass under those solar arrays. So you can hire folks to go in with mechanical means, to mow them down or cut them down, or you spray, which we don't want to do that either. But sheep actually very effective at it, not goats, because they climb on everything and eat everything. But sheep just eat the grass. So it's actually it's being used in some areas and quite effective. So we can figure out a way to expand that, and again, to build out that marketing infrastructure and support channels so that these several small sheep production facilities can jointly market their livestock product. I think it's a very good solution. So solar energy, as far as the visual, there are really no good perfect means of energy production. If we're trying to move away from fossil fuel, which can be, those plants are a long ways away from us, and the power just comes to us over a power line. But if we're trying to move away from that, we're going to need to figure out ways to creatively use, solar and wind and small-scale hydro. And even small-scale hydro runs into problems because now you have, fish habitats in the streams and stuff. So there are a lot of, every system has drawbacks. Geothermal, of course, is good, but there's a lot of, it's going to take a combination of everything. From Sally T. My husband and I work out. I'm sorry. Is this work? What's this word?
We work, but
we work, but daycare, mortgage, and taxes, living expenses have us tapped out. Yeah, so kind of universal and universal day makes so much sense, not only in helping families who want to, we want to encourage folks to have families. People want to raise families, but we don't make it easy for that to happen. And businesses want to retain their good employees that they've had trained, but if they can't afford to come back to work after having a child because of the cost of daycare, those businesses are losing employees, that they value. So if we as a society can provide a universal daycare to folks that want it so that they can go back to work, and so we have a strong, reliable, sustainable workforce, again, that makes rural New York, and actually New York in general, a place where people want to live. New York is faced with people leaving the state, and partly because it's an expensive place to live. So something like that, universal daycare, will certainly help ease that burden, and something that the entire community benefits from. Not just the folks who have their children in the daycare, but the fact that those people are now, continue to contribute and work within the society, because that's what we want to encourage people to do. We want to encourage them to work, not make it harder for them to do so. And same thing with universal pre-K. The best opportunity individuals have to succeed in life is getting a good start in education. If they have a good start, so they can all progress at the same level in the beginning, when they graduate from high school, then they can make decisions. Do they want to go to a trade school? Do they want to go directly to the workforce, military, college? A lot of decisions are made at that level, but you have to give them the tools and the education they need early on, so that when they get to the end, they can make decisions that make sense for them, not just what they are kind of just not a result of how they of the educational system they were brought up through. Okay. So I think we're about done. I think we've come to the end of the questions coming over the line. The next one is our next live webinar is Tuesday at 5 o'clock. Please tell your friends how much fun this was. I think it's kind of entertaining at some level, maybe. I think maybe a bit long. We may consider toning it down just a little bit. You can go to jimbarberforsenate.org to see the schedule, and if you want to get involved in the campaign, you can do that there. And very importantly, I know that folks are going through a very tough time right now, but if we want a representative in the state senate who really understands upstate and the concerns of farmers and small businesses, I can do that. But it's going to take a lot of financial resources to win this campaign. So if you can afford any level of donation, you can do that at the website as well. I really appreciate that. I ask for your support and your vote. And thank you very much for tuning in. We'll see you in a few days. Oh, we'll see you Sunday morning, Pancake Breakfast on Facebook, right? Facebook, I think. All right. Thank you, folks.